Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are excited about today's presentation featuring Ben Stock, Director of Healthcare Product Development at Ordr. Ben will discuss the key considerations of a medical device cybersecurity project as every healthcare organization prioritizes the need for visibility and security of these devices. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Ordr. Ordr is focused on making IoT device security simple through our zero-touch, agentless deployment, one common platform for multiple stakeholders, and enabling the complete device security lifecycle. Discover all devices, profile device behavior and risks, and automate response for any connected device. Visit ordr.net for more information. A few reminders before we get started. We are thrilled to be bringing conferences back to the HTM industry. Please make sure not to miss our December HTM Mixer in Nashville, Tennessee on December 9th and 10th. Please visit htmmixer.com for more details on this event. Let's give one lucky attendee the opportunity to win a Webinar Wednesday webinar t-shirt by answering the following question. Can you name one of Ordr's technology partners? You can find the answer on our sponsor's website, and you can answer by using the questions feature or the chat feature on your webinar dashboard. All right, today's webinar is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. The survey will be emailed to you 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you will be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinars@mdpublishing.com. As I mentioned earlier, our presenter today is Ben Stock. Ben, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining. I apologize. Let me start over. Thank you all for joining us today. Another real brief introduction. What we're going to be looking at is IoT and IoMT tools and how we get leadership to understand their value and create an ROI and a model that they want to fund in this ever-growing lack of capital we see with all the diversity and things that we're having to overcome in the recent months. So this is a very powerful slide, and it conveys a whole lot of different information. And I want to take a few minutes to look at it. You know, in the HTM field, we're focused on this middle circle of medical devices and how we protect the patients and how we protect these devices so that they can deliver the care that is needed by our patients and by our caregivers. We don't think necessarily about these other circles of things that are out there that are sharing the same network that our medical devices are sharing, and the effects of those devices on our medical devices. There's over 20,000 medical device manufacturers, and they are governed mostly by the FDA, and the FDA gives you loose rules on how they should implement security in their products. Unfortunately, the security of the products is often an afterthought. what they're delivering, their task is what the focus is, and security is an add-on at the end to make the customer happy that they've done something. We're averaging 17 devices per hospital bed in a typical hospital. Thousands of these devices are running on operating systems that are not supported anymore, and the organizations lack the capital to replace them when they need to be replaced. Even when they're on supported operating systems, patching is slow for approval by the device manufacturers. And typical cybersecurity applications, endpoint style software, cannot be installed on a lot of these devices, be them being IoT devices or not approved by the manufacturer. Quick slide to briefly go over some of the things that we're dealing with in this industry. Some of these are older, some are newer. Some are very rudimentary brute force attacks using passwords that are widely known throughout the industry. A lot of the administrative passwords are hard coded into medical devices, and changing them can change the way the device operates or not allow it to operate properly, and we're stuck with that, and we have to figure out how to protect it. Or the passwords are just not changed after the device is installed. Things, although highly unlikely, like hacking a cardiac pacemaker, are things we do have to think about, even though it's a slim possibility we'll see them. Breaches to things like IT security cameras, things of that nature, are ways for people with ill intent to get into our networks and pivot onto our medical devices. Smart TVs, you don't think about this in the medical environment. But recently I implemented a new hospital, and there are two smart TVs in every room. Not only are they smart TVs that have microphones in them that could listen, they're conveying information to the patient about their stay, lab results, EPHI that could be compromised if for some reason that smart TV were hacked. Ripple 20, although been known for a while, a lot of devices on your network are still susceptible to this, and knowing those is the first part of the battle in trying to address the vulnerabilities. Ransomware, not on this list, but in the front of our minds in these days where we're seeing it prevalently in the healthcare environment, is something that we have to be aware of. Ways to keep it out, what to do if something does happen, and how we quantify the results of what that could do to the organization. The life cycle of a device and how we protect it it's pretty basic, but the tools that we need aren't there or are not purchased by our organizations. What devices are connected? HTM's been looking and inventorying devices as long as I can remember. We're really good at getting this information into the system, but there's things that are very difficult to keep track of. IP addresses, MAC addresses, things that in the past have been a very labor-intensive task, requiring people to go to devices, take them offline, and not be able to deliver patient care to gather this information. Are we updating this information every time we do PM cycles as the revisions of the software change, as the OS gets patched? Are we capturing that information? Capturing a baseline of what that device is doing. What other devices is it communicating with? What are the normal traffic patterns of that device? Analyzing what vulnerabilities and weaknesses the device has and could be exploited. And then performing things like network segmentation to protect the device from all the different vulnerabilities that we've identified, and those that we can't resolve through patching or other services, putting those protections in place so that they're isolated and they cannot cause harm to other devices and other devices cannot cause harm to them. So who cares about this? We all care about this. And the key players, though, that are going to want to bring a product like this to your organization are going to be your security team, your networking team, and your biomed team, your HTM team. This is the group of people that has to come together to show the value of an application that can provide the in-depth security, monitoring, and protection that you need to take that to leadership so that they can understand why you need it. It's very important as we look at this to understand what each person in this environment is looking for. It's not all the same, although it overlaps quite a bit in some areas. Leadership is worried about the organization's ability to sustain itself, to deliver care, to make sure that the devices that are in the organization are up and running and accessible when needed. They're also worried about device utilization. Do we have the right equipment in the right place at the right time to deliver the care that our patients and caregivers would like to get? Or are we overutilizing devices and shortening their lifespans when we should have a properly sized fleet at that particular location? Identifying PHI and classifying devices that contain PHI or transmit PHI. This is a requirement that they know all devices and have an accurate inventory of devices that contain PHI. If there does happen to be a breach and the OCR comes in and says, show us all your devices with PHI. If you cannot produce that list, they're going to start looking deeper and deeper and looking for other reasons to cite you. And having the proper information that the organization needs to make decisions, it comes back to capital. Capital is short, and it is not, every year it seems to get shorter and shorter, and what we can replace, the list gets smaller and smaller. And being able to really identify those assets that have to be replaced and the ones that we can stretch out a little longer adds a lot of value to leadership. Security is going to be looking for the ability to identify and secure all types of IoT and IoMT devices that traditionally we cannot secure with endpoint protection. Your traditional methods of protecting devices, ways that we can isolate them and make sure that they're only doing what they're supposed to be doing. Understanding all the devices on the network, not just the IoT and IoMT devices, but all devices on the network and who's talking to what. And is that needed, not needed, or is that someone who's coming in from the outside or someone internally that could be adding risk to your organization? And then building profiles for those devices that are vulnerable and unmanaged, that can't be managed by traditional methods. Building those profiles that are easy to implement and protect those devices. Network services is worried about the ability to create network access control policies that are easy, that work, and that when implemented don't cause problems. The ability to create those tools across multiple systems and have multiple different strategies for protecting devices. What's good for one device may not work for another device and may need to be modified or changed just so that that device functions properly. And as I touched on a second ago, NAC policies that work the first time and do not require interaction and modification and testing every single time you want to protect a device. You have to be confident that the policies that are created from your system are going to work and are going to work the first time. Clinical engineering to help in maintaining an accurate inventory of your IoT and your IoMT devices. This is critical in that we don't need to be going out and re-inventorying devices as changes are made. As if you're dealing with a device that's on DHCP, traditionally we would not know what the IP address is. But if we can obtain that IP address and automatically bring it into the CMMS, we can have accurate information in real time. Keeping track of devices with vulnerabilities and recalls automatically, not having to manually produce work orders for vulnerabilities, not having to take a recall and identify all the devices and create recall work orders, but to have a system that can do that for you and give you those valuable minutes and hours back into your day. And then the understanding of how these devices are utilized. When are the key times of day that devices are being utilized? You know, are your ultrasounds on Wednesdays not being utilized from 8 to 2 in the afternoon generally? And is that a good time to perform preventative maintenance? All that information is extremely valuable day to day for the HTM department. How do we quantify this to these teams so that they understand why we need this and the value that it provides to the organization? Leadership is going to find utilization data very helpful when making decisions. Do we have the right equipment? Is it in the right place? And do we have the ability to relocate devices before we spend capital on them and utilize our valuable capital for stuff we don't need at that point in time? Extend the life of devices. Devices with outdated operating systems. If we are able to protect them and accept the risk and reduce the risk level, we can extend the life of that device, not have to remove it from the network or replace it with a more up-to-date device. And the reduced risk of PHI exposure, EPHI exposure. This is a very costly for organizations, both for the fees that can be charged if you do have an exposure event, and for the reputation of the organization and the untrackable hits that are taken when your organization becomes affected by a situation like this, when customers don't have faith in your organization anymore. Security and IT. Detecting vulnerabilities, identifying vulnerabilities, and tracking the remediation. This is a very time-consuming task, and traditional methods for tracking vulnerabilities through scans that are intrusive to the devices that could cause harm and cause the device to become unusable for a period of time or need to be rebooted are not ways that they want to do this. So having a non-intrusive way of identifying these vulnerabilities, and not only identifying them, but tracking them as they're remediated, is a very valuable part of the system. Monitoring what they're doing, adding devices, as knowing that devices are reaching out to bad websites, knowing that your medical workstation that is used for 3D reconstruction and X-ray is being used by night staff to go to websites that the traditional desktops won't let them go to. Identifying risk and quantifying them. This is the key to your ROI for security and IT. Missing patches and unmanaged systems. This is something that every security and IT team struggles with, is identifying where patches are installed. It's managed pretty well on managed systems, but they have no insight on unmanaged systems, and it can be a very manual process, taking hours of time out of their day that they could be doing other stuff. Same with outdated operating systems. You know, as they get fixed and updated, is the list being updated if the equipment was updated or if remediations were put in place? Network services, device detection. Passively, as I mentioned before, identifying devices on the network without having to take the risk of an active scan that could cause harm to the device. classifying the devices as medical devices so that we know where they should be put on the network and how they should be handled. Visibility to what they're doing. This is an overlap, but the visibility is different for each individual group on what they want to see. And then the key here to an ROI calculation for network services is the amount of time it takes to implement NAC policies. The segmentation of devices can take a long time without the proper tools or the proper information from the vendors, which are hesitant to provide this information, or research on your part from the organization to determine how the policy should be built. Giving that time back to the network services to be doing the things that they really need to be doing is invaluable. HTM. Accurate information is critical to the HTM department. It is also very time consuming to gather. So reducing that time to gather that information allows the technicians the time they need to perform PMs, to perform the repairs, and ensure that the equipment is in proper working order. It also eliminates human errors, grabbing IP addresses, MAC addresses, all of that information, and then manually entering it leads to a lot of errors that could, in the end, cause problems. Immediate, with integration with your CMMS, immediate updates as changes are detected. Not only immediate updates, but detecting devices that you don't know what they are that have just been introduced to the network. Being able to proactively identify those devices and add them or investigate why they're there and what they're doing. Automatic NAC policy generation. I keep coming back to this one, but when you test a NAC policy, it's not in the middle of the day, it's in the evening. You're bringing people in on overtime, and you're bringing them in on overtime multiple times if that policy is not proper and does not work the first time and causes downtime to the equipment. Having a way to automatically generate the policies and be confident that they're going to work saves time and resources. Identifying and prioritizing cybersecurity risks. We can't remove every piece of equipment from the hospital just because it is a risk. We have to identify the risk, put it on a scale, and determine if we're willing to accept that risk or something needs to be done. And then identifying what can be done and what can be done to mitigate the risk to where it's at an acceptable level, or if it is not, to get in a list that we need to replace and upgrade with actual data to back up the fact why it needs to be replaced. And also develop a plan so that over time, as these devices become more risky and you know their operating systems are no longer reported, you're identifying these things to leadership ahead of time so it's not a surprise when the capital ask comes. One of the key things I've touched on is the legacy and unsupported operating systems. This is something we face all the time in clinical engineering and HTM, but it's also in building automation, retail systems, your credit card processing systems, your digital signage, lots of different places you see this in your organization outside of the HTM department. All of this, if can be protected, leaves capital and other resources that can go to medical devices and medical systems that you might have not have received otherwise. These OSs can be discovered automatically. They can easily be tracked and flagged so that they know it can be addressed. And then security policies can be built around each individual device or a group of devices so that that group or that individual device can remain active and functioning in your organization. So how do we quantify all of this? There's multiple things we need to look at. An outdated operating system, replacing that equipment is a pretty easy one to figure out. But if you have 20% of your medical devices or 25 to 40% of your workstations that are on outdated operating systems, this is not something that can just be replaced with a small capital ask. It's something that has to be done over time. So quantifying how much you have that needs to be replaced, how long you can extend its life is a great way to provide ROI on a project like this. Beyond capital cost, protecting those devices that are out there is also another way. The cost of downtime can be calculated and based on different devices in your system could be quantified to show what even a day of downtime could cost in revenue. PHI exposure can be calculated. What it would cost if your organization was attacked and information was lost. Based on how many records you have, the exposure to those, and how much it costs per record, you can create a breach cost. This does not account for the reputation of the organization. That can also be quantified with some work to determine, the long-term effect of a breach on the organization and what it will cost the organization in lost revenue. This is a case study that was done at one of our clients, where we had a client who had requested capital for 3 EKG machines. After identifying the need for the EKG machines, they asked, do we really need them? And looking at utilization data, they found that they had 9 in their inventory. 5 of the 9 were used less than 10% of the time. So instead of spending $75,000 in capital, they moved 3 of the 5 devices and deferred the capital spend for later. So although that capital is going to be spent somewhere else, it's going to be spent in areas where they need it more. Another real life example was a POV that was done, and the question was, do we have enough infusion pumps, and are we using them properly? So rather large organization, 14 hospitals, done over 30 days, and a little under 3,000 infusion pumps were discovered. Of those discovered, only about 1,100 of them were being used on a daily basis, and over 3 weeks, only 1,700 had been utilized, leaving 671 pumps that were not utilized over a 3-week period. This is this is a graphic representation of how that is mapped out and the information that you can pull out of a system like Ordr. With this, they could determine what was the right number of pumps. The organization decided that about 80% capacity is where they wanted to run. That left them with an excess of 571 pumps that were being rented. Your organization might not rent pumps. They might purchase the pumps. They might only rent overflow pumps, but the calculation could work the same for either one. 571 pumps rented at $260 a month in a 12-month period saved the organization about $1.8 million in operating expense that could be reallocated to other needs for that organization. With an IoT discovery tool, you get more insight into your network. Before you have one, you can see things like your MAC and your IP address at the network port. But after you have one, you get much more robust information. You can see MAC address, IP address, yes, but you can also find out what the manufacturer of the device was connected. You can find out the model, serial numbers, what operating system it's running. Is it communicating PHI across the network? Does it have known vulnerabilities or FDA recalls open on it? And where it is on the network, is it on a segmented VLAN? And it's not only for your medical devices, it's for all your IoT devices, your security cameras, and other things that IT supports like Zebra printers. When this is integrated with your HTM CMMS system, all this information can be brought in to the system, allowing you to populate fields that have been very difficult to populate or impossible to populate in the past. When there's a software update version, it's automatically sent to your CMMS, allowing for information to be accurate and timely and not have people entering that information every time something occurs. Fleet insights that we've talked about before on the previous expense. Do we have the right amount of equipment? Is it being utilized? Is it being overutilized or underutilized? And the device usage detail that will allow you to do things like schedule PMs on a time when the equipment isn't needed or isn't in use are valuable tools that can be provided. Other uses of integrating with your CMMS, asset management gives you you can identify unmanaged assets, things that you don't know are on the network that should be managed and should be identified. Enforced onboarding processes. This is a big one. Making sure that as the devices come on the network, you know that they're coming on the network and you can gather the information needed. And bringing devices into compliance. Making sure that the patches are being properly done and make sure that they're getting done in a timely manner, and identifying devices that have patches available. Reducing the risk to the organization is key when implementing a product like this. Being able to identify those threats and reduce the risk, and identify the risk and reduce the risk all at one time. And then again, with utilization, being able to identify the devices that are not used, overused, or utilized in inappropriate manners. So Ordr has the ability to provide this service via a small, lightweight appliance for free for 30 days. You can reach out to the above URL and sign up for that. And very easy, simple, little information is needed. And that is the bulk of my presentation. Thank you very much. And I would like to take questions if they are available from the audience.
Thank you so much, Ben. Let's see what questions we have. Let's start with this one. And also just a reminder to our audience, if you would like to ask a question, please use the questions feature on your GoToWebinar dashboard. Our first question is, who should be the overall owner of an application like this?
That's a great question. So in general, there's a couple ways to look at this. The owner of the application, it's going to depend on the organizational structure. If the HTM department is structured in a way that they have dedicated resources for cybersecurity and the ability to support an application like that, it could be very easily housed in the HTM organization. If they do not, the owner of the application like this, in my opinion, should be the security team. They're going to be the ones that are going to be the governing body over risk and what should be mitigated, what shouldn't be mitigated, and how it should be mitigated. So that is where the ownership of the product should lie.
All right, our next question is, are there other teams that could benefit from a system like this?
There are. We mentioned the three key teams being security, network, and HTM. But because a product like this not only identifies IoT and IoMT devices, it also identifies your traditional desktop devices, teams like just the general desktop team, if they're using an ITAM, an IT asset management tool, and it is not populated with data, that data could also be populated into a ServiceNow tool, so that the desktop computers could be identified by their workstation name, but then also give you a robust amount of data into that system, so you truly know what your inventory is, what's online at any given time, and where those devices are located.
Thanks, Ben. I believe you mentioned to me previously that you had some examples or a sample that you could show if we had enough time. I'm wondering if you wouldn't like to show a few of those at this time.
Sure, we can get into how these types of systems work in general. So, as I mentioned before, there's a sensor. It requires a physical device being installed on the network, generally through a tap or a span port in your network. These sensors monitor and do deep packet inspections on all the data that is coming across the network. From that, the relevant data is removed and sent to a data lake where it can be interpreted. The PHI, at this point, all the PHI and any kind of identifying information has been stripped out, so you're not sending any PHI data out. In the data lake, it identifies the devices, who they're communicating with, and what they're doing. And then it interacts with the SCE center that provides additional data that cannot be pulled out of the web traffic. FDA, vulnerabilities, anything that's been classified once the device has been identified. Then the system creates a flow genome that it identifies all the traffic that the device is seeing, who and when it's communicating with any particular device, whether that is inside or outside the network, and then allows you to create policies that you can use to enforce actions to restrict communication for that device. There's a couple ways of doing it depending on the solution you choose. Ordr has the ability to do a cloud-based solution where that data that is found during the deep packet inspection is sent to a cloud, AWS service or an internal service, or an on-prem service where that data stays within your organization, allowing you to keep control over it and have the ability to access it as needed. The devices are identified and classified and categorized, so you can easily see how many monitors you have, how many iStats you have, how many of each particular medical device you have, and you can easily drill down in each one of these classifications to see different information about each one of the individual devices. And all of this is automated with very little interaction from the end user. The device is identified, classified, and categorized automatically using machine learning and AI technology. One of the real key things that we've been seeing is things like Amazon Alexas on the network. And they're in key areas. So in the reception area where we come in and people ask information about patients, there's an Alexa there. It's a security risk because anyone could be listening to that data. If they're at a nurse's station, they could overhear conversations between nurses and doctors about patients. This is a threat that we haven't seen in the past, but it has to be identified. This is an example of the baseline communication that you can see, identifying the end device, its internet traffic, and what is normal and what is not. It's a very quick way to look and identify any behaviors that are outside of the norm of the flow and use this data to create a baseline that can then be monitored to identify behavior that is abnormal. And then with this, we go back to the segmentation and being very versatile and having the ability to segment using many different tools. Cisco ICE, firewall, various different firewalls at the port level on the switch. Being able to use these depending on what each organization has available is a very key to being flexible and being able to deliver the remediation that is needed to protect those devices. So that's just a quick overview on how a system like this would work. I'd be open to any more questions if they've come in.
Thank you. Ben, some of the questions that had come in had to do with using and with devices that are compatible, so I thought it would be helpful for the audience to be able to see a few more slides. One of our questions that has come in is, can the solution have interface with PACS and or HIS?
So with PACS or the EHR, I'm assuming is what the question, the health information systems. So there's a whole, if you can go on the website, if you were looking to answer the original question, there's a whole host of different integrations available out there. We generally do not integrate with the PACS system, but we monitor the DICOM data going in and out of the PACS system and create an image of what is going on, that's where a lot of the utilization data comes from, is the grabbing the DICOM packets and identifying what is in them to identify what the device is doing. There are talks of integration with the EHRs, and those are just beginning talks. The overall concept of what we would be doing and the value that would add is still something we're trying to identify. If I didn't get the question exactly right, if they could clarify a little bit, I'd be more than happy to expand.
All right, our next question is, can this work with wearable devices or devices outside of the facility? Home care equipment, things like that.
That is a great question. Outside of the facility, depends on how far outside. So if we're talking clinics, things that are connected to the same network, yes, absolutely, the solution can see those packets, do the deep packet inspection, and understand what's out there. When you get to home healthcare, it truly depends on how the configuration is set up. A lot of it is coming through a VPN, and it can be very difficult to discern what it is. We're also seeing the same problem with work from home, with workstations that are now coming in from home through a VPN. Determining what is on the other side of that VPN is inherently difficult because that's the whole purpose of the VPN, to protect. So I know it's a long-winded answer. It is something we are working on, and as home health has expanded through this crisis, it is something that we know needs to be addressed. But at this time, it's not at 100% yes, we can see everything in the home environment. What was the second part of that question?
It was for home health care.
That was all, that covered it then, the home health care. Yeah, home health care is very difficult. And it's something that we're trying to address, but just the inherentness of trying to protect that data as it's coming across from a home environment is difficult to determine what the device is.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Ben, for your time today and for that great presentation. I would like to encourage everyone in our audience today to visit our sponsor to learn more about the products they provide to our industry. Please visit ordr.net. A quick reminder that you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. The survey will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit from the ACI. And you will be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once your survey is submitted. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinars@mdpublishing.com. We will be back next week with another webinar. Please visit webinarwednesday.live for more details and complimentary registration. Thank you so much. Have a great day.